Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, believe it or not, a massively popular corner of the internet, those Hindi moral fables you see all over YouTube. I mean, these animated stories get millions and millions of views, but what are they actually teaching? Let's get into it and explore the pretty complex and honestly surprising moral world that they've created.
Now, we poor people will have a home in a water tank. Just let that sink in. This is a real line from one of these stories. It's so dramatic, it's desperate, and it just perfectly captures the incredibly high stakes these characters are dealing with. This is a world of sudden, total ruin, and sometimes an even more sudden redemption.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get a feel for these modern fables by looking at where they almost always begin, with a huge crisis. Then, we'll look at the strange, unconventional shelters that become symbols of resilience. After that, we're going to unpack the 4 clear paths to salvation that pop up over and over. And finally, we'll figure out what the ultimate moral of this whole digital universe really is.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, the moment everything just falls apart. You know, it's interesting. Almost every single one of these stories kicks off not with some slow decline, but with a sudden, catastrophic event. It just rips the foundation out from under our characters' lives. You have to wonder if it's tapping into a very real, modern anxiety about how fragile everything can feel.
So for instance, take the families of Raju and Asha. In 2 totally separate stories, they're both just abruptly thrown out of their homes by their landlords. One family finds out their land was illegally sold right out from under them. The other gets evicted because they lost their job and couldn't pay the rent. Just like that, in an instant, they're out on the street with absolutely nothing.
In another story, it's not a person who's the villain, it's nature itself. An earthquake hits a small village, and in just a few moments, a family's home is just gone. It's a pile of rubble right in front of their eyes. Their whole world, literally, collapses.
And sometimes, the crisis is really personal. There's a story about Arjun, a loving son, who gets into a terrible accident. All of a sudden, his family is staring down a staggering hospital bill, 5 lakh, for a surgery he has to have to survive. I mean, a single event like that pushes them right to the absolute brink, financially and emotionally.
So, with their lives completely in ruins, where do these people go? Well, this brings us to one of the most powerful and honestly weirdly consistent symbols in these fables, the makeshift, totally unconventional home.
And yeah, these are not your typical shelters. We're talking about a family taking refuge in a giant abandoned water tank in the middle of a junkyard. Or another family, after that earthquake, building a tent for themselves out of some tarpaulin and salvaged wood. And then, in one of the more fantastical stories, a woman gets blessed with a magical giant pot that actually becomes her house.
So you have to ask, what's going on with these homes? Their symbolism is just so powerful. They aren't just a place to get out of the rain. They really represent rock bottom, right? But they're also the starting line for a brand new life. They're this incredible testament to survival, to resilience, and to the kind of ingenuity you need to build something, anything, from the ashes.
Okay, so from this point of total crisis, how do our characters find their way back? This is where the moral framework of these fables gets super clear. We've actually identified 4 very distinct and consistent paths to salvation that show up again and again and again.
These are the 4 roads. The first one, pure ingenuity and just plain old hard work. The second path relies on the kindness of other people. The third one is all about faith and, well, a little divine intervention. And that fourth one, it's actually a warning, a cautionary tale about how pride and jealousy don't lead to salvation, they lead straight to failure.
All right, let's dig into that first path, ingenuity. This one is for the proactive hero. These are the characters who don't just sit around and wait for a miracle to happen. They go out and create their own. They see a problem, and through their own cleverness and just tireless effort, they invent a solution.
For example, remember those 2 daughters-in-law, Mahipa and Sivli, after the earthquake? They used their husband's supply of tarpaulin to build tents for their entire village. Or think about Ankita, who needed all that money for her husband's surgery. She invents a whole new dish, these pickle-stuffed parathas, using only leftover spices, and she builds a successful business from nothing. It's incredible.
Now, the second path is totally different. Here, salvation doesn't really come from within. It comes from the outside. A stranger, usually someone wealthy and kind-hearted, sees what the main character is going through, recognizes their good character, and just decides to step in and completely change their life.
Remember Raju's family living in that water tank, just struggling every single day?
Well, after Raju helps a man get his stolen bag back, that man, who turns out to be a property dealer, is so impressed by his honesty that he just offers him a free flat and a job. It's a very clear reward for being a good person, delivered by a total stranger.
And now for our third path, faith. This is where the stories really lean into the fantastical. When a character is shown just immense piety and kindness and virtue, often while they themselves are suffering, some kind of divine or magical force steps in and provides a miraculous solution.
Prachi's story is the perfect example of this. She and her mother-in-law are literally starving. But when a holy man, a sadhu, shows up at their door, Prachi gives him their very last bit of food. And in return, he blesses their barren land. The next morning, their little hut is gone, and in its place is a magical pothouse and a field that's just overflowing with peas, giving them a home and a way to make a living. Her charity is rewarded like 1,000 times over.
And finally, we have that fourth path, which, like I said, is more of an anti-path. It's the cautionary tale. These stories don't just show us what we should do. They are crystal clear about what we should not do. And the two biggest sins in this universe? Pride and jealousy.
The tale of two pickle makers illustrates this perfectly. On one side, you have Shraddha. She starts making pickles purely out of spite, just to one-up her successful cousin. She takes all these impatient shortcuts, trying to dry her pickles with a hairdryer and a room heater, and she ends up ruining everything. But on the other side, you have Ankita. She humbly learns how to make pickles from her mother-in-law to save her family. Her motivation is pure, her method is diligent, and what's the outcome? A successful hotel business. The moral couldn't be clearer. Your character is your destiny.
So, when you put it all together, the sudden disasters, the symbolic shelters, and those four very different paths to salvation, what's the ultimate moral here? What are these digital fables actually trying to teach their huge audience?
At the end of the day, these stories are constantly championing a very specific set of virtues. They teach resilience, showing that you can rebuild your life even if you're starting from inside a water tech. They prize humility and they punish arrogance. They celebrate kindness, both the kindness you give and the kindness you receive. They lift up ingenuity as this incredible life-saving skill. And under all of it, there's this deep, powerful faith that if you're a good person, your virtue will always, always be rewarded in the end.
And that kind of leaves us with one final question to chew on. In a world that so often feels chaotic and unpredictable and morally, well, gray, what is the profound appeal of these really straightforward stories? Why do millions of people keep tuning in to watch these narratives where hardship is always overcome and being good always wins? It's definitely something to think about.